everyone. Welcome to episode 424 of This is Whole Life, where we dig deeper each week into the message happening here at Whole Life. And we do that through the conversation, which includes you if you so desire. If you were in our online chat on Saturday morning, your comments are here. If it's during and after the service, you might have emailed podcast@wholelife.church. Then they'll be here, and we do have one today. Or through voicemail or text 407-965-1607, because the more questions and comments we get, the more we can direct the conversation to answer or to talk about things that are on your mind. So, being that this was an unusual news cycle this week, we wanted to start off before we got into the message with some thoughts on what happened earlier this week in Pennsylvania.
Saturday night, right?
Saturday night.
Where were you at, Randy? When you heard?
When I heard, we were actually watching The Chosen. We're in season 4, and we started in the afternoon because it was kind of a, rainy afternoon, by spots and pieces. And we'd been out, we came back, and we were just watching The Chosen. And then right before I went to bed, I checked my X, which is Twitter, formerly Twitter, just to be clear. And then I didn't get to bed for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Melanie, how about you?
I was sitting at dinner in the Dominican Republic across the table from my husband and my parents. And my dad was looking at his phone, and he looked up and he said that there had been an assassination attempt.
Yeah. When those kind of things happen, you really kind of remember where you're at, what's going on. For me, I was in, our living room, and my son was on his phone, and I don't know what I was doing. I don't think I was on my phone at that point. And he said, there's been an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And yeah, we immediately started to look and see what was going on. And, one of the things I've always appreciated about Whole Life is that we do talk about the things that happen in the news. We are conscious of what's going on in this country, and we do speak to the things as they pertain to the realm of the spiritual. And, we've said it on a number of occasions, and I think it's just worth saying again that there's genuinely no place for hate. Mm-hmm. There just isn't. And I found it deeply disturbing that there were people celebrating that this assassination attempt happened. I don't care what you think about Donald Trump. Celebrating a person's life almost being taken, not okay. And and then watching some of the things that were people posted on social media. I'm not talking about people from Whole Life. I haven't been spying on you if you're from Whole Life, so I'm not speaking directly to that. But some of the other things I saw on social media, the level of hate on both sides of this particular issue, just deeply disturbing to me. As a country that we're not in a good place when we feel like we have to resolve our differences through violence, when we celebrate violence being done to another political party, that is not a good place for a country. It's not good for people who carry the name of Christ either. And so, I just wanted to take a minute and just say, I think no matter what your feelings are politically, what happened Saturday was heinous. Shouldn't be happening in the United States. And I hope that here at Whole Life that we will feel free to disagree with people's ideas, feel free to have many different opinions, feel free to speak up for justice and for freedom and for all those things, but to do it in a way that does not demonize other people for their thought processes and for who they are. And I know that can be difficult. I really want to take a moment to acknowledge that when there are people who have thought processes that put you in peril, that make the things that you believe in, that you feel afraid that your rights are going to be taken away, that your liberty is in peril because of the politics of the other side. I recognize that can get very personal, and very and more than just a difference of opinion, because it involves real things that will really hurt you if that particular person gets elected. And I recognize that the place that I am, for me, in my place in life, I don't have to feel as scared about what political policies are going to come down as maybe other people do. And so I do want to recognize that. At the same time, I have to go back to the spiritual aspect that I mentioned earlier, which is Jesus saying, love your enemies. Love the people who say bad things about you. And so for me, the question is, how do we go about disagreeing without losing love? How do we support strongly the things we believe in and still be kind and still view other people as image bearers of God, even when they do things that could potentially be hurtful and painful to us? And so I hope that as a church, that's something that we can kindly, calmly ponder and put into action. I've seen that here at Whole Life, and it's one of the things I'm grateful for. And if I do feel concern as this election season heats up, and certainly the heat was turned way up over this, and it's right for people to be really upset about an assassination attempt. But as that heat has been turned up, I hope that here at Whole Life we will still be a place where no matter what side of the political aisle you're on, we can maintain friendships, we can be kind, we can be Christians first. Yeah. And so that's kind of one of the things I wanted to say. I don't know if either of you have anything that you want to weigh in on as you think about this, but I did want to say that to kind of get things started today.
Melanie?
Well, just ultimately, I think that it's a good reminder to be thoughtful about our rhetoric, what we're saying and how we're saying it. There are a lot of things that happen that are outside of our control, and a lot of times it's easy to get lumped in with one group or another, and that group becomes depersonalized, or I think you used the word dehumanized.
Yeah.
And I think that words matter, and how we use our words, we're responsible for that. I think that the decisions that we have to make and the choices that we have to make need to happen in our conversations with each other, and they need to happen at the polls.
I would just say that I had a couple people reach out to me, some who I only know online, and a couple of them who know that I'm an independent, and they're like, well, we know you're not really necessarily a fan of either of the main people in the race in either party, whether you're talking about Trump or Biden. They're like, how did you take this news? Were you upset? I'm like, of course, you have to be upset. It doesn't matter whether you agree politically with either, the president, or this could be a congressperson or a public servant at any level. And if you've let that part of it, just don't assume your neighbor, because they might be supportive of someone, might have ideas that you think are really radically different than yours. Because I found that as they reached out, this one person, we've talked in the past, and they were very much like, yeah, I'm not a fan, but also I would never want to see, anyone injured because of who they are or, what they say, especially in politics, because we know a lot of it is theater and you have to say certain things. And so maybe just and Ken, I can never remember it. You say it and I go, I wish I could remember that. It is, we assume good intent.
Yeah.
So let's assume that those that may be different in this area, and like you said, it's really, really hard, but let's assume that everyone that may be different with us or even on the same side, like everybody has good intent.
And what I would say is you don't have to assume good intent out of all the politicians, but what I would ask you to do is assume good intent out of the people that are here at Whole Life. How about that?
And don't compromise your own values.
Yes.
I think that's the key thing. Like there are things I feel very strongly about that I will argue for, that I feel that I'm very passionate about, but I recognize that the changes that I would like to see made, the things that I would like to push forward into dialogue can't happen at the expense of my own values. Mm. So I think that's an important thing to maintain.
And it's such a wide, in this case, it's such a wide degree of things that are, when you talk about politics, it's why it's so complicated, because you can 10 things over here, but you 8 over here. So what's my decision and how can we make those kinds of changes? And just being open, though, to people that have different ideas. I've grown to the point where I find them interesting more than threatening or more than any kind of negativity. So it can be fun, but it also takes another person who's open on the other side to say, I do want to recognize that for some people, and I think, I think on either side of politics, the each side often legitimately, sometimes illegitimately, feels like the other side's going to be doing things that are harmful directly to them, that are going to cause pain and hurt and suffering. Both sides have that opinion. And depending on which side you're on, you're going to think that the other side's illegitimate in their concern, or that your concern is very legitimate. And I do think there are rights and wrongs in this. I do. And now's not the time where I'm going to get into what those are. No.
But what I would say is I want to really acknowledge that for some people, politics really does come down to some things that they feel like are going to really cause deep harm. And with that said, that's where I think we have to really remember Christ's words to love your enemies, love the people who are not being kind to you. Jesus said, what good is it if you only love the people that are good to you? Even non-believers do that. And so I think that what really differentiates us, I hope, as Christians is that we're Christians first. Followers of Christ first, everything else is a distant second. And if we're followers of Christ, we have to remember that we're going to love people. It doesn't mean that we don't stand up for what's right. It doesn't mean that we don't speak up. It doesn't mean that, but it does mean that we love the people that we vehemently disagree with, even the ones that we think may be harmful to us. And love is, and I think sometimes we take love to be somewhat wimpy, and it's not. I'm not talking about being wimpy, but I do mean thinking about 1 Corinthians 13 and what love is defined there as, and how are we loving to the people the way that Christ was. And so that's what I hope maybe we'll think about here at Whole Life. And Melanie.
Well, I think something that you said earlier is important, and that is that loving your enemy is going to hurt more for some people than others.
Yeah.
Those of us who have, fewer things about ourselves that, put us into a category of being marginalized. It's a lot easier to talk about, just being interested in other people's opinions and that kind of thing, because it doesn't affect us as much as it affects others. So I want to make sure that we don't trivialize how much that actually hurts.
Absolutely.
To do that.
I think that's really important for us to think about. And maybe that's one of the challenges to think about for whoever you are out there listening is what would it be like to be the person on the other side of the political aisle or on the other side of the issue that you're feeling strongly about. We can, can you put yourselves, I think curiosity is one of the things that really makes a big difference in how you go about living your life. And if you can put yourself, if you're strongly anti-abortion and you can put yourself into the shoes of a person who looks at their life and they got pregnant and maybe they could have prevented it, maybe whatever, but you can see where they're sitting at. You can think about what it would feel like to be them. If you're on the other side of it, can you think about what it feels like to be somebody who feels strongly about that abortion is wrong and why they might feel that way? Maybe they feel like that they're, what would have happened if my parent had done that to me, or anyway. So these are things that I think if we can put ourselves in other people's shoes, and it doesn't mean you have to agree with their thought process, but if you can kind of try to look at it and think about how would I feel if I were on that side of the issue, it gives us more compassion and it helps us see people as human beings as opposed to just somebody that's disagreeing with something that is completely and blatantly obvious to us.
Yeah. I think if you listen to, the more you listen to someone else, especially people that you really, really disagree with, the more you find out that at the end of the day, after you've let it digest, even if you're still at a place where that makes you angry for, and maybe really good reasons, and it just kind of works you up inside, the more you know that person and the more you hear their story and you hear about them, the more you find like, oh, it may not change my mind, but I can see
they're humanized.
I can see where that changes your life. And even though I don't agree, I understand why if I were you, I would probably be and think and act and, champion the same cause. So I think listening is just it's an easy thing to do, but it's also such a hard thing to do.
And maybe just to close off by underlining what Melanie said is that let's have compassion and understand that for some of us, for some people, I shouldn't say us, let me change that. For some people, asking them to love their enemies requires a lot more.
Yeah.
A lot more than it does of others. And so it's something we can think about and maybe use our imagination to put ourselves in those shoes.
Absolutely. All right. Well, as much as we would have maybe hoped not to speak about this, well, of course we hope not to speak about it, but this week might have been the most fun I've had personally at Whole Life in quite a while. Because of the laughter.
Nice segue there, Randy.
Very smooth.
Because of the laughter.
It was a little awkward to be that my sermon was on laughter. Now, I would like to point out the sermon happened before the events.
Yeah.
Because I think if they had happened the day before, I think I would have probably changed my sermon to something different.
Yeah.
And in fact, we're even thinking about some modifications to this next week's sermon. So stand by.
Okay. Well, and Lucas and I went all improv night in What's Happening with Randy and Lucas, had a good time. We laughed.
The laugh track was
perfectly timed. His deadpan of not this week, was just absolutely perfect. So if you didn't catch the whole service, go to our YouTube page and check out worship.
I think you need to just keep the laugh track. Maybe we should use the laugh track in Ken's sermon also.
Yeah, I think it was
not
fun.
a fan of it.
Whenever we need to.
I hate to be the downer on this one, but I just don't care for laugh tracks.
Okay, well, I mean that was kind of the point because it was sort of a parody of laugh tracks. Yeah,
because it was laughter.
Because the laugh track actually happened when some things weren't even funny.
Because it was that was part of the fun was that some of it was totally not funny, but we laughed, but we let the track laugh anyway, and that was on purpose.
Ken looks very unconvinced.
Yeah, he's like, I don't know that I did have, and in our defense, I had. Just personally, I had 4 people come up and be like, other than the Randy and Randy edition, which we're never doing again, to be clear again, This was
That's
my
too bad.
favorite.
That was a good one.
Yeah, we
It
can't
was.
top Randy and Randy.
Yeah, well, that's a tough act to follow. Let me tell you something from someone who knows about that. But so our message was on laughter, but we're going to go back. We had an email, so let's jump in the Wayback Time Machine for those of you who are old enough to remember that. And we're going to go back to last week where this email pertains to last week's message about play. And it says, "Hey, Randy, first a big thank you to Melanie and Ken and you for the discussion last week in regards to my question about play. It made everything click and cleared my mind on the subject. This is why I love this podcast. It gives me a ton of proverbial light bulb moments. Second, please thank Jeremy for his sacrifice and service to our country, and also please thank him for sharing his story. It did my soul good to laugh that hard. That was a great story, and we are not going to ruin it here. But if you've ever thought about being a park ranger at any time in your life, or joining the military, then go ahead and line up and check out. Early in the message, we had a guest speaker who shared a story with us that I think you don't want to miss. So swipe up in today's show notes and hit Speaking of Grace in the show notes, and it will take you right there and have a good laugh on Jeremy.
Yeah, watch both services. You'll laugh both times.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a good story.
It doesn't get less funny.
It actually is more funny as you know what's coming.
Because the first time
I feel like we could tell it right here, and you could go watch it.
There was confusion over, well, wait a minute, isn't that the poster for? And they're like, I think that's the joke. And they're like, oh, get it. So we had to, there was a little bit of explaining that had to happen there too. And then finally, the email says, third, when life can be so beautifully complicated and the future is sometimes murky, at least for some of us, I am so thankful that we have a God who loves to laugh. I'm even more thankful that he chose to bestow the gift of laughter upon humanity to get us through the darkest times. As always, I'm keeping the whole life family in my prayers. Carolina Dave. So there you have it.
Thanks, Dave.
I know. I was like, hey, it almost sounds like we're your favorite podcast or something.
Or something.
Hey, that's high praise from Carolina Dave.
Well, head over to Apple Podcasts and hit that 5-star review if you don't mind. Okay, Carolina Dave, that would be awesome. Help raise a little awareness. So we're talking about laughter, and I knew for a fact, and I didn't sell you out. His first service, you caught Sonny. He was on the front row, and I'm like, "Oh, we're sitting on the front row." I'm like, Heather McGray, and
You
she
felt it coming, did you?
I knew it.
You knew it was going to happen.
I knew it, and Ellie was like, right before you said it, I tapped Ellie, and she looked over at me, and then as soon as you said it, she's like, "Oh!" And I can hear her. If you listen to the podcast, you can hear both her and Emily. They were close enough to the microphone to hear them talking like, "Mama got it, Mama got it." But you were.
Hey, it's the splash zone. It's the if you're on that.
That's it.
It could be literally and figuratively the splash zone.
But knowing that we're thinking about, that we have laughter. We've just heard Jeremy's story, which was really funny. And you found a list of texts, and I'm only going to read the one that I thought was just the absolute best. It said, "What sorrow awaits you who laugh now? For your laughing will turn to mourning and sorrow." And you hit a couple people in the audience each service, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And then people, Kyla sold you out right away. She was like, "I know what's happening." And I even thought Alfred was, even though he knew what was coming, he was also just almost a little bit like, "Oh man, maybe Ken will come through with one, and I'll be that person.
I'll be the good one.
I'll be the good one." And it was like, no, that's not happening. That is not happening. But when you read those texts and you're just like, man, that's the God that I grew up with, was like, well, what sorrow awaits you now? And you start thinking about that. And then as you started going through, I'm like, well, I think my humor is a little bit like Ken's, where I usually like a little bit more dark humor that's usually funny to me. And what was it when we were kids? They said it's funny. It's only funny when someone gets hurt, and then it's hilarious, And so that was or at least, well, I don't know, maybe that was just.
Speak for yourself, Randy. I'm not.
He's like, I don't remember hearing that one, Randy. I think you're out on your own on this one. But you went on to say you kind of explained through culture and context, and understanding Scripture, and that And I'm like, if we're to get some of those small, because some of them I was like, oh, I can see that. Like totally Jonah. Like if you can't read the story of Jonah and not find it funny,
it's hilarious.
I agree with you. I've always thought that was.
It's a book of comedy.
Yes.
And the very last line in the book is how many cattle were saved. Like that's the punchline of the whole book. When it comes down to it, it's all about the cattle.
and then if you're a family that grew up with, with your kids and Veggie Tales, it's the fish slappers, right?
Right.
And so that's the crimes against humanity that the Ninevites have enacted upon the general population. And so it's even more funny. So that makes me laugh even harder. But when I was sitting there thinking, when I was younger, I didn't find Jonah funny at all. I was like, man, what a spiteful God. Like, well, can we talk about like what you want me to do? Could we like sit down, have a meeting like your whole life? Ken's like, hey, Randy, I've got something I'd like you to do. And we have a conversation about it.
And then Randy runs off to Tarshish and it's just a whole mess.
I'm looking for
runs off to Tampa.
Tampa.
I told you to go to Daytona Beach. Why are you going to Tampa?
Yeah. And so it feels like a very heavy-handed, or it did. It felt like a very heavy-handed, one-sided conversation that's like, I don't recall me telling you to go wherever it is you think you're going, and you should have been here. And then like the fear that I felt for Jonah, like you could feel like when he's in the boat, like, dude, I'm going to die. They're going to throw me overboard. I did think he was pretty cool for taking one for the whole team that didn't like know why they were all in peril because of him.
Taking one for the team that he put in danger.
Like he gave them he didn't take them down with him. But that story used to really make me feel like I didn't think God was a good person. Like people would use that in a sermon illustration all the time. And like, what a great story. What a great story that was. And, let's wrap that up. And I never felt good about it. I find humor in it like you do now. But I wonder if when we're talking about culture and context, if this is what it takes, and maybe it is what it takes, and that's the question, is that what it takes to understand where there might be humor in a story, in a Bible story, that maybe we don't completely understand because we don't have the culture and context? Or are there other pieces that it also causes us to miss because we don't have the culture? Because if you don't know how to study, how do you get that?
Well, I think that sometimes, though, if you watch a television show, somebody came up to I can't remember who it was. Somebody came up afterwards and was telling me about a television show that's very, very serious, very dark. I think maybe it was you, Steve. I think maybe it was maybe Steve. Apparently some very, very dark show, and yet it's been nominated for a whole bunch of comedy awards because they put the humor into it. And sometimes that's the only way that you can handle something that's super heavy and dark, is to make a joke about, or to insert humor in there to lighten it enough to be able to talk about. And that's what I think is happening in Jonah. There's nothing funny about what God does when he asked Jonah to go talk to, prophesy to Nineveh, because what I think sometimes get missed by us, an Israelite in that time who was reading that story would have been furious with God for different reasons than we are. They would have been furious with God for being, for just the same way that Jonah was, that God didn't go ahead and obliterate Nineveh. And, you talking about loving your enemies, the Assyrians had done incredibly barbaric things to the Israelites, like stuff that in our modern mind is pretty close to unimaginable. The kind of torture, just the mayhem.
And Nineveh was their
capital. It was the capital of. It was the capital of the country that's been oppressing your people, murdering, raping, disfiguring. One of their favorite things was to horrifically kill people's children in front of them and then gouge these people's eyes out So that was the last thing they saw. These are the kind of people we're talking about. This is not
fish slappers.
Not fish slappers. No. And so it's an Israelite would cheer that God is going to obliterate Nineveh, but if like Jonah, they suspect that God might go, oh, I'm going to change my mind, that's not cool. And the other part about it is that when God changes his mind, it makes Jonah look like a false prophet because, that's one of the tests of a prophet is what they say, does it come true? And so when you see Jonah running away, we tend to be very judgmental. God asks you to do it, you should go do it. Well, there's a number of different basically knew that God was sending him on a mission to try to get these people to repent. And he didn't want them to repent. You just go ahead and obliterate them already, God. Send the fireballs now and let's be done with this.
Or be entertainment in the town square.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where you see, in my opinion, humor inserted into the book of Jonah because there's so much heavy stuff going on there. The fact that God actually has to create a giant fish to swallow Jonah, to take him, deposit him, literally vomit him up on the shore of where in the direction he's supposed to be going, And
then dripping in digestive juices.
Yeah.
That's why they call it comic relief.
Yeah.
Because there's relief.
There is.
Yep, there it is.
But even in that scenario, for someone who doesn't know that Nineveh was a Syrian city and some of the practices that you just laid out and how horrific those are, may look at it and not find, like, they might look at it and say, Jonah, what a wimp. All God did was ask you to go preach to a couple people over here. You turned and ran the other direction, and then you're going to yell at God because the shade of the of the little bush that he was under, it wilted, and
it wasn't even a bush; it was a vine.
Was it a vine?
Vine, yeah.
but it could be a vine because
all I have to say to people like that is I took a group of people to Savannah, and I won't mention any names or anything, and we went on a walk around the city, and I can tell you right now that had they had a vine to be over top of them that was giving them just a little bit of shade and that it died, they would have cursed me, and because they were already some potential cursing going on already.
I thought you did a good job with the.
We're not
shade
giving
trees.
away. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
all right.
Yeah,
we're not giving away anything here, Randy. So I'm just saying.
But then
hot is not fun
because God didn't like put the proverbial thumb down and just squash these people.
Yeah.
That makes me, so in another way, it's almost like, well, what are you complaining about? God asked you to go and basically preach the gospel to the people. They heard you. You communicated in a way, whether that was, through the Holy Spirit or whatever credit you want to take for it, whatever. And they repented and God didn't have to kill them. And then you're running away. That just, it doesn't seem to make sense, even if it's not funny. So I feel like there's a ton of ways you can miss the point, even if you don't understand. But also, if you're just picking up your Bible and you've never heard of the story of Jonah, or you've heard of it but you've never read it, and you read through and you go, what am I supposed to take away from this? Like God maybe had a little grace on these people, but Jonah was not a real nice or good person, seemingly. And like, what are the lessons that I'm supposed to learn from this when I don't really know the background, the culture, and the context? Where do I find it so I get it?
Well, I would argue that it's pretty blatant that you don't have to have culture and context to understand when you read chapter 4 of Jonah, where Jonah basically said, didn't I say, God, this is what you were going to do? Didn't I say that you weren't going to destroy them? Didn't I say that you are full of loving kindness and forgiveness? And didn't I say you're going to repent from doing this? The whole reason I didn't want to go. I mean, black and white says it just almost verbatim what
Pretty
I just
clear.
said.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the points that I love about the book of Jonah is that sometimes when we read the Old Testament or when we talk about the Old Testament, it's this angry, mean Old Testament God, right? And yet even the prophets, the minor prophets like Jonah, they knew who God was. They knew that he was full of kindness and love and didn't want to destroy and didn't want that. That was something that was apparent to them in their time. And so it's as true in the Old Testament as in the New Testament.
So in the chat, we had a group of us that were kind of going back and forth about, when we're talking about culture and context and how we get led astray a little bit, or we could possibly be. I feel like personally, like knowing where your need for having something or for understanding something comes from. Is it because I just have no knowledge whatsoever? Is it because I read something else in the Bible and I think this supports my theory on that, and I really want that to be true, because if that's not true, then I feel like that might be something that's pretty important to me. But we also, I think we all have blinders that make those even maybe impossible to identify sometimes. How can we know when we're thinking about finding humor or finding the point or finding what God has for us? How do we know that's coming from a good place in us, where we're not trying to read? Because I feel like sometimes we're reading to support ideas or theories that we hold dear. And is there a way that we can do that and feel like, well, I think this comes from a good place? Or do I just have too many blinders that I don't know about that make me feel like I search for, and even subconsciously, where I really feel I think I'm doing this the right way?
There are so many different directions we could go with that
know,
question.
and it's
I feel like this is a whole sermon series that maybe we might need to think about.
It's a really broad question, but like legitimately, people wanting to study and listen and take in and understand what we're talking about and what God's talking about, what he wants us to know. Ken mentioned during that early time that Luther didn't want James added to the Bible. And it really does, it starts to make you think about, maybe James shouldn't have been in the Bible, or maybe, one of the other ones.
Don't say that. That's one of the things I wish I had said during the sermon. I love the book of James. It's one of my favorites. Luther didn't particularly care for it because it messed with his saved by grace, righteousness by faith. In his opinion, it messed with it. I don't think it does, but
that's the perfect example where it's like you've got two really intelligent people who, for whatever reason, think.
Oh, you're comparing me to Martin Luther? Two intelligent people? What? I like that.
I don't
Randy.
know. I assume Luther was pretty smart.
Randy's going for a raise.
Wow. I never met him, but I know
two intelligent people. Wow, Randy, that was awesome. I appreciate that. Can you next time maybe you can lump me in with Einstein too? I'll take that as well.
Tell me where you need to be, and I'll make sure we get the right ladder out to get up as high as we need to be.
The two of you are done.
And I know it's a question that's really hard to answer, but
so this is a little bit of a tug of war, I think, that we have, because the reformers felt it was really important for people to be able to have the Bible and be able to read it in their language, and everybody should be able to read it. It's simple enough to understand.
Sure.
However, as Ken sort of showed in his sermon this past week, if you don't have the additional knowledge, you're missing stuff.
Sure.
And so there are people who spend their lives working on scholarship on, the biblical text. And it's a living scholarship, because it's not like, we're reading this dead ancient text. Every time they find something, in an archaeological dig that maybe has new words or something, it sheds light again on this ancient text. So there's ongoing scholarship where people actually get into the layers of all the context and the words, the linguistic, the formation of the verbs and all that kind of stuff. So on the one hand, everybody has a Bible in their language they can read and understand. And on the other hand, there's so much more to it that people have studied, and there's scholarship available to dig into if you're interested. So I don't know. Maybe the biblical text is like an onion. You just got layers. You just keep peeling.
Like and I do think that, I do think that the more you study and the more you read the richer the experience with the Bible is. And I think that if you go to school and become, Melanie, you're going to get a lot more.
Not a biblical studies scholar.
But nevertheless.
That's not what your office says.
Yes, exactly. Dr. Melanie Bachman. There's a lot to be learned there. But the cool thing is that we live in a time and a place where there's so many resources available that if you want to understand, you want to be able to dig deeper and understand the context and the culture and more of that. There's tons of resources that are excellent that you can look at. And, just this last week for me, I was reading a text and I saw, and it was actually I was preparing for my sermon, and I saw something that had really nothing to do with laughter, but I was like, oh, that's really cool. Because I was being reminded that the word Adam is a word play in Hebrew off of basically the word ground or dirt, right? Yeah. Which I think I might have mentioned that in the sermon.
You did.
But what hit me is I was just kind of reading through Adam's use of his name in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And I was looking at the curse that was put on Adam, right? And I don't know if this is, but I actually have this on my list of things to study a little bit deeper. But one of the curses that God gives is he says, by the sweat of your brow, you will bring forth food, basically. And it just kind of hit me. Oh my word. Like before Adam and Eve took the fruit from the tree, God gave them a garden that the mist would come up out of the ground to water the land. There was a mist that would come up and water it. The Bible says there wasn't rain at that time. And there were these 4 rivers that kind of went around the Garden of Eden, but then this mist would come up out of the ground to water to provide food. And now I started thinking, well, isn't that interesting that before God took care of it, the mist would come out of the ground, and now the mist comes out of the other soil, comes out of Adam. Sweat has to pop out of him to help him get the food that God was willing to provide without that being necessary before. And it kind of goes back to what I think the whole message in Genesis 3 is that you can, if you want to be God will let you. But this is what it looks like, and it's going to take sweat and pain, or you can let God do it for you. You can let God be God, or you can be your own God, and that's painful.
Well, and God put a curse on the ground.
Yeah.
Which is another interesting layer.
And if you want to go back,
if Adam's name means ground, there's just a lot going on there.
And if you want to go back about 10 episodes and find out more about 4 rivers, you can do that on our...
Which isn't named, which is... That's John's family, my friend. Yeah.
Was named. They named their business 4 Rivers Barbecue.
But not after Genesis. But.
Yeah, it was from the 4 rivers in Genesis.
Was it?
Yeah, he told us that
I
on
wasn't
the podcast.
paying enough attention, huh?
Yeah.
So it's his family members and the Genesis thing. Okay.
Layers.
Layers,
right? So
context.
There you go. And it
sometimes even when you're told the context, you're not paying attention.
And sometimes you're not really trying to make it funny, but there it is. So if you missed that conversation from Church Retreat, any of them, then you've missed out. So go back and check this out. It's only about 1 or 2 swipes.
Or if you weren't completely paying attention and you want to hear it again.
Could be. So let's get to the questions. We had some lighthearted, which I thought were kind of fun, and from email all the way from the UK.
Oh yeah.
Our good friend Joe wants to know, I have a question for you. Do you think God and Jesus laughs at us when we do funny things? And my personal opinion is absolutely. Have you met me? No, probably not personally. But
the Bible actually says that God scoffs at the wicked. So
the answer is yes.
So if you're doing something dumb that's wicked, we have a definitive answer for you. And if you're just doing something dumb that isn't really hurtful, then I think that I don't know. I always just picture God being a lot like a parent, and there are so many times that Rashawn and I would write down the hilarious things our kids were doing when they were growing up, and we'll go back even now and read some of them and just giggle at just how cute and funny.
Yeah. I think that the idea is there. God delights in you and dances over you. Of course, it's metaphoric, but
is it? I mean,
God, well, that's another topic.
Okay.
The layers continue here on the podcast.
But I imagine God could laugh over you as well.
Yeah. I just can't imagine that a piece of our lives that are so big is equal to sometimes and more. You mentioned some of the great comedians that have that imbalance of, wow, this person is just naturally gifted funny. They can't help but be funny. They're not even doing anything that's funny, and it's funny because it's them. Yeah. And the opposite suffering that many of them have gone through. The first person, Ellie whispered in my ear, Robin Williams. And I'm like, yeah, Robin Williams.
She was actually thinking of exactly who I was thinking of.
Yeah, it's the first person that comes to mind. And so I feel like there's so much, pain and darkness from the fall. Like you said, water used to come up out of the ground and water the world. And then Adam is now, it's by the work of your brow, and there's that kind of water perspiration. That how can God not be the other part if this is the part that he didn't want but he had to let happen because of those choices and free will? I just feel like, to me, I can picture God laughing, and I think he laughs along with me. But that's just me. So
the consensus is in the room that we don't have 100% evidence in the Bible, but all the context and all the information would lend itself to that belief, we think.
Sure.
That's what we think.
I like that. See, you don't have to know for sure. You can just have context and culture and stuff, and you'll get close.
And an imagination.
Ah, there you go.
Curiosity.
So T. Cinco said, I think we can pretty much pick and choose verses from Scripture to make the Bible say whatever we want. I remember Zed Stefanovich once said, "It's not what a verse says; it's what the Bible says." So I was like, as we were having this conversation through that. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I was just really curious. I would love to hear him expound on that.
That would be good. We should have him in here sometime.
We should.
He's
that
so
would be
good.
Fun.
I enjoyed it. We've done one episode with him.
An actual biblical study
Actually, two,
scholar.
I think. Yeah, no, he's so interesting. But that would be all right. We're going to mark this down. Okay, I will actually email him. I have his email, and I'll see if I can find out the answer to that question. And Matthew followed up. He was our host this past week online and said, I find it interesting that in everything God created, somehow humans find means and ways to make those things toxic and hurtful to one another, even laughter. So, maybe it's harder for us to believe that God can laugh because we have also turned that into a weapon that can be used for evil just as much as for good. I made me kind of stop and think about that. Mama Doc said, knowing the appropriate time when to cry with someone and when to laugh with them, what suggestions for us do you have to be more discerning and able to respond in God's best wisdom? We kind of gotten that.
Yeah, I took a stab at it on Sabbath when Matthew asked me at the end of during the first service Q&A. So Melanie, what do you think?
Oh, was this one did this one go in Q&A? I didn't miss. Yeah. I must have missed that. Okay. Yeah. Well, as long as we have it out there, go for it.
Well, I think relationship is really important. I think understanding, context. If you have a context of someone's life and you're walking with them in it, I think that the appropriate times to laugh and cry with people become more evident.
Okay. Well, and that kind of leads us to asking, said, what we find funny is kind of a judgment call. How do we adjust our judgment to know what would be healthy or unhealthy laughter? And so my question, I followed that up and I just asked them, do you have an idea for yourself what would make funny healthy or unhealthy, just for you personally? Asking that back to the person whose name was asking. Sorry, that was confusing. And asking replied, maybe it would be measured by empathy for others and not doing harm to anyone else. And I think that's a really good answer, but I also think that is the part that maybe we have to understand to some degree, like you said, in that relationship, because I can think something is really, really funny. And when you get crickets from the other side or worse, you're hoping that it's funny. Right.
Yeah, I remember as when I was a brand new pastor, attending a seminar from a very experienced youth pastor, and he told the group, he said, be very, very, very careful how you tease teenagers. And I think it can go past teenagers. He said, because a lot of times they'll laugh at what you're saying while they're carrying hurt inside. And because if you're teasing, if you're, teasing them about, oh, you're always late, or it seems funny to us, and maybe it is funny to them, and maybe it's not. And so he's just said, be careful about it and make sure that you are safe for them to say, that wasn't funny. Please stop. And if they tell you that, stop immediately. And I think that's one of the things when it comes to humor. If somebody tells you that what you think is funny is offensive to them or hurting them, don't argue. Just stop. Just stop, because their feelings are more important than your joke.
Right. No. And that was the part that I felt as we were having this discussion while you were preaching. We were everyone was kind of going back and forth, and then someone who has my personal number texted me off the chat and was like, because I said, I think we need to go deeper into this a little bit, because just for like what you just said, someone may very well just cover up the fact that they're hurting by not saying it. And that doesn't mean that we're not doing damage, especially, I just think of, even just our church family, who you probably know better than a lot of people that you may interact with. And if we were just to do damage there because we were unaware or callously, just thought, well, this maybe is a little inappropriate, but I'm going to throw the zinger in there anyway because I feel like we need to, levity, or it's just a good joke and I want to say it. But really feeling like you have to understand what, like you said, if it's not funny, it's not funny. And especially if someone says, what you're saying is not cool, it's hurting me, that it really has to be like understanding that it's just a joke and you should probably at least apologize and maybe try to figure out why, it was hurtful, and make sure
and maybe examine yourself a little bit to see if there's something in there that caused you to try to tell a truth in a joke that
yeah, that's something you can really unpack. Yeah.
Measured by empathy for others and not doing harm to anyone. I think that's
really good.
That was really good asking.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
And so, but I did want to push that one out to us to see, and if there were people who were interested to hear what we came up with, and I would be interested to hear too, if there's something that you have found in yourself that kind of gives you some kind of a barometer, or you found that, just like Ken said, that person giving that advice was really, really solid, something that you don't forget. Those are good kind of things that we'd love to know. So podcast at wholelife.church or 407-965-1607. Would love for you to share those. I thought that Rod, who is in the chat, had a great comment. He said, I wholeheartedly believe that if Jesus never laughed, he would not have been surrounded by little children. So I thought that maybe out of all of the ideas that we talked about in the chat and in the sermon, what did Jesus do? And if the kids were around him, he was obviously a safe place, probably a fun person.
Fun place. Yeah.
And that would connotate laughter. So I think that was good. And then finally, Aaron said, I just laughed by Ken's dramatization of Jonah. That made it funny to me. Maybe I need to listen to a dramatized version of the Bible. I started listening to the audiobook Play that Ken mentioned last week in his sermon while I'm working, and it's very interesting so far. So kudos, Ken, for the recommendation on that.
Yay.
So Aaron is enjoying that book, and it made me kind of laugh on the dramatization, but we had another conversation in the chat about finding different ways to read the Bible, like finding a reading plan. I had mentioned to I think it was Lamb, that one of the most interesting plans that I read the Bible through in a year was as close to as to whoever created this thinks, as theologians and research, that the Bible done chronologically. And I was like, it was really weird that it was Genesis, Job. You're like, wait a minute. I thought Job was like way later, but according to what they think, at least, or whatever evidence they have, one of the earliest books after that. So I thought that was really interesting. It made reading it a different perspective.
Yeah.
So, and there's lots of those plans, and then.
Yeah, I think you just make sure you get a plan that splits up Jeremiah, because spending 2 months in Jeremiah will be really depressing.
It'll make you lose your place on the plan.
What? Wait a minute. I think do I take credit for that day? Hit the check mark? No. What the Jeremiah? If you want to do Jeremiah, the way to do it is what is the group? And they're in the YouVersion Bible app, which is probably the most used version by the public. It's the group that does Bible studies.
The Bible Project.
They do animations, like the hand-drawn animations. Like if there is one book that and there might be a few more like numbers, it is fun to watch them go through that book.
Yeah.
And some of the things that they talk about that I've never picked up before, and I've been through the Bible, I think 3 times all the way through, besides just reading piece by piece. And I thought that was like the best way to get through Jeremiah. That was like totally like the best time I've ever had reading through that. So because there was a little entertainment value, and it's like and a few facts that I didn't know, so it made it palatable. So where do we rest? Are we all in agreement? God laughs, wants us to laugh. Good for the soul.
So.
I vote yes.
I vote yes.
That's 3. We should have a buzzer in here or something. Like we should make this like American It's Got Talent.
I think that.
Well, the Bible says that God laughs. So, like I said, if you are a sola scriptura person, then yeah, God has to laugh because the Bible says so.
Well, there you go. That is definitive.
Not the wicked. But
What?
Doesn't change the fact that he laughs.
Why are we
but
whispering?
God also whistles, and
Sings.
there are some other,
Sings, huh?
Dances.
other activities.
You know what makes me happy?
Coffee.
Well,
Laughter.
yes, but what is that? That's a hobby.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Is coffee a hobby for you?
You bet. If you when you're into it's like tasting, other people taste wine and try to find all the little differences in the way it was grown, it was prepared, it was stored, all those things. All that's true of coffee, and that's kind of my thing. I like to find new and interesting and really good tasting coffees.
So that means donuts can be a hobby for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you're a connoisseur, then, people, because you want people to share in your hobbies, and who doesn't want to eat donuts other than maybe people that are like diabetic, gluten-free, taste-free, dairy-free.
Why are you looking at me?
I only glanced, and then I realized
Poor Melanie.
I moved on. Sorry, Melanie. You didn't have donuts today, did you?
I did not have
It was a
donuts.
birthday.
Or
It was Carla's birthday. Yes.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed
today's melon. No,
I enjoyed watching you enjoy the donut.
Yeah, the salty. Yeah, in case you're.
So yeah, that's true. We should say a happy birthday if you have Carla Meunier, our youth pastor's cell phone number. You should,
Give
as
her
soon
a
as you hear
text.
this, you should text her and say
Carla
happy birthday.
Loves attention.
She does.
So
She
be sure
does.
to shower her with lots
If you
Lots
could-
of attention.
And if you could show up with a donut and a candle and a party hat for her and get pictures taken, I mean, it worked for her husband, but I don't know about for anybody else. Maybe not. Anyway, so
Can't
it was
hurt
a
to
good
try.
time. No, that's what I say, and you might even get a good laugh out of it. So this week is the family that embraces hobbies, and so that is coming up. Is that this? That's this week as well, isn't it? We have a busy week at Whole Life.
We have
a busy summer because
the sermon is this Saturday,
We're in party mode.
and then next Tuesday we're doing the hobby night.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I got those.
So
mixed up.
SAC Comedy Lab tonight.
As you hear
if you're
this on
listening to this
Wednesday.
on Wednesday night,
Yep.
you can come around 6:30, grab a plate of food from
Simply
the
divine.
Simply Divine food truck. It's going to be great. And we have coupons, so you can. It's a choose the price you want to pay. The full price for a meal is $12, and we have coupons for $2 off. I want to say $7 off, and all $12 off. So there's no reason not to come eat with us.
That's it. And I've heard it's going to be a really good time. SAC Comedy Lab going to send
It's
somebody
going to be
over.
great.
And I know we're coming. My wife was like, "What, improv night? Heck yeah, we're going to improv night. Got to laugh."
Yeah.
So that was a perfect setup. So good job on that.
It'll be great.
And then Hobbies is the following week. And so if you haven't gotten your hobby, I know we've talked about it here. We've put it out in the announcements and all that good stuff. But Ken is still waiting each day. Ken at wholelife.church, waiting for that hobby word to be in the subject line and waiting to hear
I do like
about
seeing
your
that.
hobby.
And we're actually going to ask people, if you have a picture of you doing your hobby or a picture of your hobby, do we want them to be in the picture? They probably need to be in the picture, right?
Preferably.
Yeah.
Send us a picture, and it may wind up getting used at the
that's right. I
end
forgot
of the
about that.
church service this next week when we.
So for all of you that join us online,
Yeah.
that were, the regulars of you that I know also listen to this, if you want to be able, this is a way for you to get involved and, get your picture up and put your name on it if you want to. And that way we'll know who it is that's up there. Or you can remain anonymous might want to be.
But just to send it all in one place, send it to Melanie at wholelife.church.
Melanie at wholelife.church. Okay.
Where I think we might show some pictures this week.
What's the deadline for
Yay.
that submittal?
Noon Friday, but you know what? We're actually going to talk about it during the church service. So
Earlier is better.
Yes,
But if you don't hear about this until
A
Saturday,
little bit later. Give it a whirl.
then
if you don't hear
we'll
about
accept
this
late entries.
until December 21, 2026, well, you're really late at this point, but send Melanie the picture anyway.
Yeah, I still want to see it.
You could still send the picture and then help and have us guess as to why you're sending us the picture. If it's December 2026, that could be fun too. We might even laugh a little.
Wow,
I'm just
see,
saying.
just tying it all together.
There it is.
Trying. I think that is it. Man, I love to laugh. And it makes everything else better. Today we talked about, what makes you like your job, right? Like, why do you like your career? And, good, solid people that, enjoy working together, hard work. All the things that you could put in there. But, it's hard to do this podcast every week without hearing people in the hallway of the office laughing through the door.
True.
And I've had people, you listeners, you guys know, you hear it, and many of you have been like, where do you guys record anyway? It sounds really noisy. And I'm like, well, we are at the end of the hall, but we also don't police those out in the hall. And Tuesday is the day where everybody sees each other for sure each week. And so that is this group having fun. So there you go. Why not? Family that laughs together.
And we do have fun.
We do have fun, even if we can't have the donuts.
That's true.
Man.
Well, two of us can.
Well, two of us did.
There's a few donuts at the end. Should we go to take care of that?
I think we should.
All right.
Well, guys, we would offer you a virtual donut, but that just doesn't work yet. And when I figure it out, I promise I'll make it happen here at This Is Whole Life. We will have virtual donuts and really good coffee because I know the difference.
And if you have a best donut that you would like me to offer an opinion on whether it's the best donut, bring it by.
Not here's the place to go. Go and find out. Drop it by. Yeah, we do accept donations Tuesday through Friday. In noontime,
Dude,
we're all usually hungry.
I'll take them pretty much any time.
Well, Saturday morning, who can't have a donut before they go up on stage? That works too. Ken's a hardworking guy. He could use an extra donut. So there you go. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. Hope you laugh a lot this week. And I hope that just makes the rest of your week amazing. Check out Improv Night and Hobbies. Send us your pictures. Thanks for listening.